Hi, my name's Dan. You can call me Kaweah, or anything you like. Here's some of my thoughts on Robinson Jeffers' breakthrough poem, Tamar. It was written in 1923 and is now a century old. You may never have heard of it, but it was quite the big deal soon after Jeffers was first discovered. Its success was due mostly, perhaps, to its rough and passionate style. I think Charles Bukowski's repeated pronouncement, "Jeffers is my God," is likely due to Jeffers' courageous frankness, and some of that surely shows in Tamar. Everyone has their own reading. My reading betrays an exposure to Melville, Nietzsche, and Zoroastrianism. For instance, I tend to see Tamar's eponymous protagonist, Tamar, as a female reincarnation of Melville's Ahab, the monomaniacal sea captain from Melville's poetic masterpiece, Moby Dick. I think that perhaps Jeffers intended Tamar as an homage to Moby Dick, maybe. Or maybe there's something more intrinsic going on. Perhaps Tamar, like Moby Dick, is a catastrophic depiction of the strain between the human spirit and human impotence or powerlessness. Jeffers' poem is a difficult one to unpack. Let's begin with the spark that starts it all, beauty. It's been said that beauty is truth, but Jeffers takes it a bit further. For Jeffers, beauty is power, beauty inspires, beauty drives ambition, beauty is hazardous. In Apology for Bad Dreams, a later poem that Jeffers wrote in reference to Tamar, he asserts that all beautiful places are crying out for tragedy. In this dangerous beauty, Jeffers sees the majesty and might of God. Let us peek through the willows at the girl Tamar's early encounter with beauty. Jeffers writes, "Meanwhile, Tamar uneasily dipped her wrists, and crouching in the leaf-grown bank, saw her breasts in the dark mirror. She trembled backward from a long ripple, and timidly waiting, entered the quiet translucence to the thighs. White, shining, slender, and virgin pillar, desire in water, unhidden and half-reflected among the interbranching ripples, arched with alder, overwoven with willow. Ah, Tamar, stricken with strange fever and feeling her own desirableness." This is obviously a Narcissus moment, but Tamar does not fall into the pool. Tamar is empowered. Tamar is inspired by her own wild beauty and perhaps by the wild beauty of the land of her birth. Jeffers asks, was it the wild rock coast of her breeding, and the reckless wind and the beaten trees and the gaunt booming crashes of breakers under the rocks, or rather the amplitude and wing-subduing immense earth-ending water that moves all the West taught her this freedom? Tamar's peculiar love of freedom will perhaps be her greatest challenge, and even her undoing. Tamar's brother Lee, like Jeffers himself, cherishes the beauty of nature. However, I wouldn't say that beauty is his only motivator. His primary driver might be death. He nearly died after falling from his horse, and now he wants to live life to the fullest. When he thinks of the beauty of the land, he wants to share it with his sister, so understandably, he spends more time with his sister. Tamar, for her part, is inspired by the power of her beauty, so she seduces the nearest man, who happens to be her brother Lee. In Apology for Bad Dreams, again, Tamar says in passing, "I have my desire." This appears to imply that desire is key to Tamar. I wouldn't want to overturn my understanding of a poem based on something Jeffers implies in a later poem, but this focus on desire does not appear to contradict a straightforward reading. Again, Jeffers describes the moment of awakening as follows: Tamar stricken with strange fever and feeling her own desirableness. Though what is being described here is sexual narcissism, and though Jeffers was admittedly an admirer of Freud, I think perhaps he may have been getting at something more general, or at least more Nietzschean. Tamar is somewhat proud of her sin, as it represents a kind of transcendence over human law. But that pride will soon be challenged. Also, let's not forget that self-love at a species level is a key theme throughout Jeffers' catalog. I'm not certain that Jeffers was aware of this connection when he wrote Tamar, but that doesn't necessarily mean he didn't feel a connection. This, after all, is a poet we're dealing with. Earlier in Apology for Bad Dreams, Jeffers appears to draw a parallel between the terrible beauty of the land and the terrible and passionate spirit of humanity. He writes, "This coast crying out for tragedy like all beautiful places, and like the passionate spirit of humanity, paying for its bread." It happens that Tamar was written in a time of haunted houses, that is, the years after the Great War, the 1920s. So, surprise, the story takes place in a house crawling with spirits. There are visions and voices that tell Tamar of the future and the past. Jeffers appears to associate these visions with the St. Elmo's fire that Ahab interpreted as a divine sign. Jeffers writes, "Visions gathered on that house like corpuscent fire on the hoar mastheads of a ship wandering strange waters." The voices serve a key role. They help Tamar to discover that incest is something of a recurrent event in her family. So her sinful innovation, seducing her brother, is nothing new. Her transgression is nothing more than an echo of the transgressions of former generations. Here is where recurrence enters the picture. That is likely inspired by Nietzsche's notion of eternal return. For Nietzsche, by my lights, this idea presented a thought model by which one might better appreciate one's circumstances. For Tamar, recurrence is a reality that establishes that all the strivings of the will are predestined and therefore ridiculous. Freedom is an illusion. This insight is deeply disturbing to Tamar. She is humbled for a moment, but something in her wills to deny and defy. Jeffers describes her internal battle as follows. "It makes me nothing, my darling sin a shadow and me a doll on wires," thought Tamar with one half her spirit, and the other half said, "Poor lies, words without meaning." Tamar doubles down. She will not be defeated. She seduces Lee again and again, the poet writes. Tamar, finding no hope, slid back on passion. She had sought counsel of the dead and found half-scornful pity and found her sin foredated. When Tamar conceives, gets pregnant, she needs to obtain a scapegoat, a semi-legitimate father for the child, so she seduces a neighbor. This act reasserts Tamar's sense of authority over man, but it also brings on a surge of self-loathing. Self-hatred blossoms into something more social, or rather antisocial. Tamar begins to plot to destroy her family, who act here as stand-ins for humanity or the world. To illustrate this propagation of hatred, Jeffers selects from his palette a California sunset, to our astonishment. He writes, "As a fire by water under the fog bank of the night lines all the sea and sky with fire, so her self-hatred reflecting itself abroad burned back against her, all the world growing hateful, both her lovers hateful, but the intolerably masculine sun hatefulest of all." By this point in the narrative, Jeffers has made the sun quite hateful indeed, It is more than a masculine symbol. It is the god of the deadening of the year. He writes, "This was the high plateau of summer and August waning. White vapors breathed up no more from the brown fields, nor hung in the hills. Daily the insufferable sun rose, naked light, and flaming through the pale, transparent waves of the air drained gray the strengths of nature. The year went up to its annual mountain of death, gilded with hateful sunlight, waiting rain. Stagnant waters decayed, and trickling springs dried and turned foul, and Tamar felt in her blood the filth and fever of the season." The sun of August gives rise to a fever across the land and also a fever within. The fever that Tamar feels within is a fire. She says, "I have smelled fire and tasted fire, and all these days of horrible sunlight, fire hummed in my ears. I have worn fire about me like a cloak, and burning for clothing." Feeling the dry, hateful heat of the season, Tamar believes that God wills the destruction of her sinful family. She says, "It is God who is tired of the house that thousand-leggers crawl about in, where an idiot sleeps beside a ghost seer, a doting old man sleeps with dead women." To Tamar, only fire can cleanse the house of its sin. She says, "Nothing would ever clean them but fire." She lights a candle as a slow-burning fuse in her bedroom, then later, from a distance, prays thus, "O strong and clean and terrible Spirit, and not Father, punish the hateful house. Fire eat the walls and roofs. Drive the red beast through every wormhole of the rotting timbers and into the woods and into the stable. Show them, these liars, that you are alive." Jeffers indicates that this is a prayer to God, meaning the unitary power of the universe, by using the capitalized word he in framing this prayer. Immediately before beginning her fire prayer, Tamar says, "Why, now he speaks," when she hears the farm bell ringing fire. This prayer is eerily reminiscent of Ahab's more defiant fire prayer to his creator. Ahab cries, "O thou clear spirit of clear fire, whom on these seas I as Persian once did worship, till in the sacramental act so burned by thee, that to this hour I bear the scar. O thou clear spirit, of thy fire thou madest me, and like a true child of fire, I breathe it back to thee." Now, Tamar has gone beyond supplication. She has forced the Spirit's hand. She is the one who lit the fire, the candle. God does not obey her by giving her what she desires. Instead, the spirit of the place dominates her. Tamar is made to dance against her will. She is sexually assaulted by rude spirits. Her child and her fire are extinguished, and only she and her room are scarred. She protests, "Everybody but me has luck with fire." Tamar can't seem to accomplish any real physical destruction. The spirit of the place and its resident ghosts seem to conspire against her. But there is a sense in which Tamar does burn the house down. If by house we mean the house of Caldwell, that is to say her family. Finding that she has no luck with fire, Tamar sets out to undermine her family psychologically, and in this she is quite successful, and very much the fire spirit, but only among fellow humans. Not long after admitting her impotence with fire, she begins to stoke the family passions and declares, "See, I am the fire burning the house." In the end, the house is cleansed. It is burned down, but not by Tamar. The fire is lighted in an act of innocent adoration by Tamar's idiot aunt. The event seems thoroughly irrational, and yet the cleansing is achieved just the same. Tamar appears to understand this well beforehand as she contemplates eternal recurrence. Jeffers writes, "She lay thinking with vacant wonder that life is always an old story, repeating itself always like the leaves of a tree or the lips of an idiot." Along with her beauty, Tamar also shows insight and cunning. In the end, she is no match for the inevitable. She seems to accept this, and even to rejoice in her fate as she is taken down with her family and house in a turning vortex-like conflagration, just as Ahab and his ship are consumed in the great whale sea vortex. Jeffers writes at the end, "While the house moved and the floor sagged to the south, the floor turned like a wheel." Both Tamar and Ahab are, in some sense, superhuman, yet utterly mortal. Both exhibit a flash of enlightenment, yet it is a tragic, self-destructive vision in both cases. Both stories end in utter chaos and annihilation. Where Tamar is a fire, Ahab is a bestower of fire, defiant of the gods, like Prometheus who stole fire for man. How is this? As a whaler, Ahab is in the business of bringing fire to man from the sea, in the form of whale oil. Ahab and Tamar have more than fire in common. For instance, Tamar hunts her house, her family and society, just as Ahab hunts his whale, his god. In both cases, God is a deity of destruction, whether of Tamar's house as it sways down into its flames, or of Ahab's ship as it spirals into the yawning watery vortex. Tamar exhibits a power over men, but a corresponding impotence with fire, and she, to her profound satisfaction, is destroyed in the end. Ahab, a commander of men, knows all along that he is powerless, but he defies God just the same, and so he is destroyed in his act of reverent defiance. But Ahab aside, what is Tamar's ultimate resolution? The poem itself might conclude with a hint of rebirth. Or is it only a post-apocalyptic smattering of survival? Jeffers concludes, "Grass grows where the flame flowered, a hollowed lawn strewn with a few black stones and the brick of broken chimneys. All about there the old trees, some of them scarred with fire, endure the sea wind." I don't see much promise of rebirth here. To regard Tamar on its own as a fable of eternal recurrence would be a stretch. Jeffers' doctrine of recurrence is necessary to an understanding of Tamar, but it is not sufficient. To pick up what Tamar leaves off, I think we would do well to address the poem Apology for Bad Dreams. Thank you.